This is a piece of racing history here in Daytona Beach. The last remaining section of legendary NASCAR mechanic Smokey Yunick's famous garage was consumed by fire tonight, and investigators are calling the circumstances deeply suspicious. Everyone pictures Smokey Yunick's garage as a fortress of forbidden knowledge, sealed tight and guarding outlaw engines and revolutionary blueprints so threatening that NASCAR itself wanted them permanently erased from history. The reality, when it finally emerged, turned out to be something far more fascinating and surprisingly human. After Smokey lost his long battle with leukemia on May 9, 2001, the doors to his legendary Daytona Beach workshop swung open for the very first time, revealing not government secrets or hidden conspiracies, but a remarkable public sale filled with everything from $5 hand tools worn smooth with decades of honest work to experimental engines that had pushed the boundaries of conventional automotive thinking far beyond anything Detroit was prepared to acknowledge. Scattered among the ordinary workshop clutter were genuine engineering innovations that major manufacturers had dismissed, that racing officials had aggressively battled, and that history had very nearly lost forever. So, what did the family and devoted fans actually discover when the best damn garage in town finally opened its doors for the whole world to see? The doors opened just weeks after the funeral. The plain, unassuming building at 957 North Beach Street in Daytona Beach did not host a secretive private inventory conducted by shadowy officials in dark suits. It hosted a sprawling multi-day public garage sale that drew hundreds upon hundreds of passionate fans. People traveled from as far away as Maine and Oregon, driven by the simple desire to carry home one genuine piece of American racing history from the place Smokey Yunick had proudly called the best damn garage in town. Smokey had passed away on May 9, 2001, at age 77, after enduring a difficult year-long battle with leukemia, dying peacefully at his Daytona Beach home surrounded by family. By the time of his death, the famous garage had already sat quietly closed for over a decade. He had originally opened it in 1947, steadily building an extraordinary reputation as one of the most inventive, controversial, and fearlessly independent mechanics in the entire history of American motorsports. Then, in 1987, he locked the doors for the final time, declaring bluntly that there simply were no good mechanics left worth working alongside. The building remained almost completely undisturbed until his family began the emotional process of sorting through everything the following year. What visitors discovered inside was not a hidden underground laboratory packed with mysterious machines that racing authorities had desperately tried to erase from the record books. It looked far more like a master craftsman's workshop frozen perfectly in time, every tool exactly where it had last been placed by Smokey's own hands. During Speed Weeks in February 2002, his widow Margie Yunick opened the entire contents to the general public. $5 fender hammers sat casually beside $20 boxes overflowing with authentic race car components. There were tall stacks of hubcaps and coiled exhaust pipes, a fully operational 1950s GMC dealership sign that still lit up perfectly, Smokey's heavily used manual typewriter sitting exactly where he had last left it mid-sentence, and one meticulously hand-built engine displayed with an almost unbelievable claim attached to it. This engine, the sign declared confidently, could deliver 80 miles per gallon on regular pump gasoline. The asking price was $20,000. Margie captured the spirit of the entire sale with one perfectly chosen line. "We're like a junkyard, but a first-class junkyard," she said with quiet pride. She also explained clearly what Smokey himself would have genuinely wanted for everything inside. He wanted his tools and his parts returned to active use, owned by fans who would truly treasure them as pieces of his unique genius, rather than leaving everything locked away untouched behind cold museum glass. That philosophy ran deep because Smokey had devoted much of his remarkable life to rescuing forgotten and abandoned machines and carefully restoring them back to working condition. According to his family, he felt genuine distaste for the idea of his life's work being controlled by wealthy private collectors or frozen forever as an untouchable museum display. The proceeds generated from the sale were designated to support a foundation actively promoting motorsports innovation, deliberately extending the same restless spirit of experimentation that had defined every single year of his remarkable career. His daughter, Trish Yunick Brown, reflected that while many people eagerly wanted the physical objects her father had touched and used, she was carefully keeping something she considered far more valuable than any engine or tool: his stories. Her husband, Chris Brown, described Smokey in words that every racing fan immediately and instinctively recognized, calling him NASCAR's wildest and most brilliant cheater. It was never intended as an insult. It simply reflected an extraordinary man who spent his entire career finding legal gray areas that consistently forced the official rule books to evolve and expand just to keep pace with him. The contrast with popular legend could not possibly have been sharper or more revealing. Instead of dramatic government seizures or secret midnight raids conducted by NASCAR officials, the great unveiling of Smokey's garage was a friendly public sale where ordinary working people could purchase ordinary hand tools right alongside truly extraordinary inventions that were decades ahead of their time. Even after the property was eventually sold in 2003 and the last surviving building was finally destroyed by fire on April 25, 2011, the real and lasting legacy had already been carefully scattered into garages, private workshops, dedicated museums, and personal collections spread across the entire country. Among the hammers and stacked hubcaps sat engines and mechanical components that were anything but ordinary or accidental leftovers. One promised 80 miles per gallon under real driving conditions. Others were even more dramatically radical, functional prototypes that Detroit's own engineers had personally tested, carefully verified, and then ultimately and inexplicably walked away from entirely. The hot vapor engines that actually survived represent Smokey's most technically significant achievement. Tucked carefully among the garage sale items and deliberately retained by the family were the engines that proved conclusively that Smokey had solved something that Detroit's most highly paid and educated engineers had somehow completely walked past. He had cracked the theoretical and practical code of the hot vapor cycle. While modern automobiles rely entirely on sophisticated electronic computers to manage fuel delivery with mathematical precision, Smokey approached the identical problem from a completely different and brilliantly intuitive direction, working with a carefully modified 2.5-liter Pontiac Fiero Iron Duke four-cylinder engine as his primary test platform. The completely standard production version of this engine produced roughly 90 horsepower, and achieved approximately 35 highway miles per gallon under ideal conditions. Smokey's entirely carbureted version of the same basic engine pushed an astonishing 250 horsepower and 250 pound-feet of torque simultaneously, cutting the 0 to 60 miles per hour acceleration time down to approximately 6.5 seconds, while simultaneously achieving 51 miles per gallon on standard 93-octane gasoline. He accomplished this remarkable feat through what engineers technically classify as adiabatic combustion. In straightforward plain language, rather than cooling the incoming air and fuel mixture as conventional engineering practice dictated, Smokey deliberately used waste heat captured from the exhaust system and engine coolant to superheat and completely boil the fuel mixture before it ever entered the combustion chamber. The mixture passed through an exhaust-driven turbine device called a homogenizer mounted directly beneath the carburetor, then routed through a specially heat-wrapped intake manifold until it reached sustained temperatures exceeding 450 degrees Fahrenheit. This process completely and perfectly vaporized every molecule of fuel, allowing the engine to operate efficiently at an extremely lean air-to-fuel ratio exceeding 20-to-1. Detroit laboratories and professional original equipment manufacturer engineers actually visited the garage and personally verified these incredible performance numbers on multiple separate occasions, independently confirming that the engine simultaneously met the strict federal emission standards of the 1980s without requiring any electronic computer management whatsoever. The fundamental core concept had originally emerged in the 1950s through the collaborative work of Ralph Johnson, a highly skilled Holley carburetor specialist and veteran General Motors dynamometer technician who worked closely alongside Smokey. Together, they systematically figured out how to push reliably past the normal detonation threshold, carefully managing exhaust temperatures near 2,250 degrees to precisely control the hydrogen burn characteristics. They ultimately constructed multiple distinct hot vapor prototypes, including versions based on a 3-cylinder Buick engine, a Ford platform, and a Dodge Omni. Each of these different test vehicles consistently exceeded 45 miles per gallon under real-world conditions while simultaneously producing nearly 2 full horsepower per cubic inch of displacement. There were several agonizingly close near misses with actual production, including a promising S10 pickup truck project and a potentially transformative licensing agreement with Crane Cams. Ultimately, the technology collapsed under the combined weight of legitimate durability concerns, mounting legal fees, prohibitive manufacturing costs, and the automotive industry's deeply entrenched not invented here cultural resistance to outside innovation. But the physical engines themselves survived intact. His daughter Trish personally retained 4 complete prototype units. Enthusiast Tony Allers eventually acquired the running examples and constructed a beautifully and meticulously restored daily-driven Fiero replica built entirely around the salvaged original drivetrain, which he drove regularly for years as practical proof of the technology's real-world viability. On Christmas Day in 2009, Allers generously donated that running vehicle to the Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing in Ocala, Florida, where it remains on permanent public display, while another documented unit reportedly resides at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. While the patent showed what Smokey built and documented, the racing world felt his impact most directly through the cars he built that forced NASCAR to completely rethink its entire inspection process. The legendary story of his aerodynamically modified Chevelles contains more documented engineering truth than popular mythology typically credits. The photograph that still circulates widely online, showing Smokey standing beside his Chevelle with his trademark crooked grin and ever-present cigar, is almost universally captioned as showing the notorious 7/8 scale car that single-handedly forced NASCAR to completely rewrite its rulebook. Except the pure scale model explanation is precisely the myth that careful measurements and Smokey's own published writings thoroughly contradict and destroy. A genuinely literal 7/8 scale automobile would have been nearly 10 inches narrower in total width, more than 2 full feet shorter in overall length, and would have sat on a 100-inch wheelbase. Such a dramatically shrunken vehicle would have been immediately and blatantly obvious to absolutely anyone walking casually past it anywhere in the garage area. The actual truth involved 3 Chevelles wearing 1966 bodywork, which are persistently and incorrectly identified as 1967 models in most published accounts. The real modifications Smokey executed were aerodynamically brilliant rather than dimensionally dramatic. He moved the entire body approximately 2 inches rearward on the chassis to optimize weight distribution toward the rear wheels. He carefully smoothed and strategically raised the floor pan to actively manage and control airflow passing underneath the car at high speed. He subtly lowered the roofline and window openings, raked the windshield to a more aggressive angle, and precisely altered both the front fenders and the drip rails. He even carefully sectioned the front bumper, making it deliberately taller to function as an integrated aerodynamic air dam and spoiler. The sheet metal itself remained essentially stock and standard in its dimensions, but the overall geometry had been expertly and precisely sculpted to slice through air resistance more efficiently. At sustained speeds exceeding 180 miles per hour around Daytona's banked turns, even those seemingly tiny aerodynamic adjustments translate into enormous competitive advantages measured in multiple seconds per lap. When NASCAR's inspection team finally recognized that something was clearly and significantly different about these cars, they attempted to create their first standardized measurement templates by using a wrecked Chevelle that had been driven by Bobby Johns as their baseline reference pattern. This created immediate and serious measurement inconsistencies throughout the entire inspection process and ultimately compelled NASCAR to mandate completely standardized roof, hood, and trunk lid templates for every car competing in the series, a fundamental inspection practice that continues in evolved form throughout professional stock car racing to this very day. The engineering worked with perfect effectiveness, driving one of these aerodynamically refined Chevelles. Curtis Turner became the first driver in history to officially qualify for the Daytona 500 at a speed exceeding 180 miles per hour. While fans hauled away hammers by the armload, and the surviving prototype engines found their way to museums and private collections, Smokey left the single most complete and authoritative record of his extraordinary mind in the massive book he worked to finish as leukemia progressively took his strength. Those 1,100 pages represent something that no competitor documentary or online video has ever genuinely treated as the authentic primary source it actually represents. Titled Best Damn Garage in Town and released as a substantial 3-volume box set self-published posthumously around 2001 through Carbon Press in close collaboration with his family. The complete set contained more than 400 original photographs and was carefully organized into separate volumes covering his personal life and early career, his stock car racing years and controversies, and his Indianapolis 500 entries combined with his most significant technical inventions. Respected automotive industry figure John DeLorean personally narrated the audiobook version, lending additional credibility and visibility to Smokey's own documented words. The pages detail with painful honesty the profound personal tragedy that ultimately drove him away from stock car racing entirely. In 1964, his exceptionally close friend and driver Fireball Roberts crashed violently and suffered terrible burns at Charlotte Motor Speedway, lingering for 40 agonizing days before succumbing to his injuries. The devastating personal loss transformed Smokey into an aggressive and uncompromising motorsports safety advocate virtually overnight. When his specific and technically sound proposals for dramatically safer fuel cell designs were repeatedly overruled and dismissed by NASCAR founder Bill France Sr., Smokey made the permanent and irreversible decision to officially sever his relationship with the organization around 1970, walking away from the sport he had helped build rather than continue watching preventable deaths occur. His verified competitive racing record remained entirely and permanently undeniable regardless of any controversy surrounding his methods. He secured 57 Cup Series victories, claimed 2 championships as both owner and crew chief, and earned a 1960 Indianapolis 500 victory as master mechanic. He was also the first owner in history to win 2 consecutive Daytona 500 races, achieving this remarkable feat in both 1961 and 1962. He was ultimately inducted into more than 30 separate motorsports halls of fame, including the inaugural founding class of the International Motorsports Hall of Fame in 1990 and the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America in 2000. When the final building on the old garage property burned completely to the ground on April 25, 2011, the physical best damn garage in town ceased to exist in any material form. But everything that genuinely mattered had already found its way safely out into the world long before that fire. The hot vapor Fiero still runs and sits on public display at the Don Garlits Museum. His patents rest permanently and freely in the public domain, available to any engineer willing to study them seriously. His 1,100-page autobiography documents his complete thinking in his own direct and unvarnished words. And the standardized inspection templates, the mandatory aerodynamic wings, the pneumatic pit equipment, and the safety barrier concepts that modern racing takes entirely for granted all trace their intellectual origins directly back to one stubborn, brilliant, and endlessly creative mind working out of a plain building on North Beach Street in Daytona Beach. The garage is gone. The myths keep growing louder every year. But the evidence that walked out through those doors in 2002 leaves absolutely no doubt about who Smokey Yunick truly was and why his unfinished ideas still matter deeply today.